Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we're locking down the absolute foundational chemistry of life. We're talking carbon's tetravalent properties and the chemical powerhouse that is water. Right, but we're absolutely not just sitting here memorizing textbook definitions today. I'm going to push you to see how these concepts actually play out in real-world lab experiments. It's all about taking theory to the lab bench. Let's get right into it. Okay, I want to hook you guys right out of the gate with a massive lab anomaly. Imagine you set up a conductivity probe in a beaker of pure 100% distilled water. You'd expect a perfect zero reading, right? Well, no way. It actually still conducts a tiny bit of electricity. Why? Keep that in the back of your mind. To analyze real experimental data like this, you've got to really understand basic bonding and molecular geometry. To solve that mystery, we got to start with the absolute basics. Atoms are constantly trying to achieve a stable outer shell, right? And they pull this off mainly through two types of bonds. With an ionic bond, electrons are literally transferred from one atom to another. Think of sodium and chloride turning into the charged ions that make up regular table salt. But in a covalent bond, like in a water molecule, those electrons are shared. And listen up, because right here is a massive exam trap. Under the pressure of a test, students constantly mix up electron sharing with electron transfer. Don't be that student. In a lab setting, whether a compound is covalently or ionically bonded completely dictates your experimental variables and how that stuff is going to behave in a solvent. It's a huge deal. Exactly. So let's look at our first major biological MVP, carbon. Carbon has an atomic number of 6, which means its ground state electron configuration leaves it with exactly 4 valence electrons sitting in its outer shell.
Which means carbon is tetravalent. It is literally starving to form up to 4 covalent bonds just to become stable. That magic number, 4, is the entire reason carbon gets to be the backbone of all known organic life.
Now, here's where it gets visually interesting. When carbon forms those 4 bonds, they don't just sit flat on a 2D plane. They point outward in 4 geometrically equivalent directions, forming the corners of a tetrahedron. The angle between any two of those bonds is exactly 109.5 degrees. You guys really have to visualize this in 3D. If you're trying to figure out how enzymes bind to substrates in an assay or how complex proteins fold, internalizing that 109.5-degree angle is your absolute secret weapon. It is so much more than just a number to memorize. It's the literal physical shape of life. Because of that specific geometry, carbon pulls off something called catenation. Catenation is basically carbon's superpower to form covalent bonds with other carbon atoms, creating these massive, endless chains and rings known as catenae.
Yeah, think of it like biological Lego backbones. Carbon just snaps together endlessly. And once you've got that super stable carbon chain built, other atoms, heteroatoms like oxygen, nitrogen, or phosphorus, just snap right onto it to create your functional groups. That's literally how you build everything from simple hydrocarbons all the way up to complex DNA strands.
All right, let's pivot to the other absolute essential molecule for life, water. Now, water is covalently bonded, but that sharing of electrons, it is definitely not equal. Oxygen has a much higher electronegativity, so it's a bit of an electron hog, pulling those shared electrons way closer to itself.
Spot on. So that makes the oxygen slightly negative, leaving those 2 little hydrogen atoms slightly positive. And this perfectly sets up water's polar dipole architecture, sitting right at a 104.5-degree angle. So you end up with this highly dynamic molecule with 2 distinct, slightly charged ends.
And because of those slight charges, water molecules can't help but interact with each other. This gives us hydrogen bonding, which is a weak electrostatic attraction between the slightly negative oxygen of one water molecule and the slightly positive hydrogen of a completely different one.
It's basically a molecular tug of war. The oxygen acts like an electron-hoarding magnet. Now, a single hydrogen bond on its own is actually pretty weak, but when you have millions of them working together, they give water this unbelievable life-supporting cohesion. It's the exact reason a single droplet can perfectly hold its shape on your glass lab slide.
That polar nature is also exactly why water earns the title of the universal solvent. Since living cells are roughly 60 to 70% water, most ionic substances exist as free-floating ions inside us.
Right. Picture dropping sodium chloride into water. Those polar water molecules instantly swarm the salt. The slightly negative oxygens surround the positive sodium, and the slightly positive hydrogens surround the negative chloride. It literally rips the ionic compound apart into critical, free-floating ions that are now primed and ready for cellular reactions.
Those massive networks of hydrogen bonds also grant water an incredibly high specific heat capacity, meaning water can absorb or release huge amounts of heat energy while barely changing its own temperature. In biology,
This is literal homeostasis in action. Water acts as this massive thermal buffer. Whether we're talking about keeping the internal temperature of a microscopic human cell completely stable during a fever, or maintaining perfectly balanced marine environments across entire oceans despite a scorching summer heat wave, it's the hydrogen bonds absorbing all that crazy energy. Okay, I've got a challenge for you though. If water is so incredibly good at holding on to heat, how on earth do organisms use it to cool down? Take a look at transpiration in plants. Well, they take advantage of water's high latent heat of vaporization. Because of all those stubborn hydrogen bonds, water needs an immense amount of heat energy to actually evaporate, to make that jump from a liquid to a gas. So when water vapor escapes from leaf pores during transpiration, it drags all that absorbed heat energy right out with it.
Let's do a rapid-fire comparison of two real-world mechanisms, human sweating versus plant transpiration. Both of these brilliantly exploit that exact same vaporization property. Because it takes so much energy to break those hydrogen bonds, living things can dump massive amounts of excess heat, totally avoiding overheating while actually losing a surprisingly minimal volume of water. It's just a brilliantly efficient evolutionary survival tool. Okay, the moment of truth. Let's circle back and finally crack our opening lab anomaly. Why does pure distilled water still conduct a tiny bit of electricity? It all comes down to the fact that water molecules are constantly colliding. Let's break it down step by step. Two water molecules smack into each other. Every so often, a proton actually gets transferred from one to the other. This is an endothermic process, meaning it requires 59 kilojoules of heat. And the result? It creates two distinct ions, hydronium, which is H3O+, and hydroxide, which is OH-. Boom! There it is. Pure water always contains a tiny, tiny concentration of these free ions, and that is exactly why your highly sensitive lab probe is picking up that conductivity reading. I really need to passionately call out a massive student pitfall here. If you see an exam question asking if pure water is 100% molecular, the answer is strictly, unequivocally false.
Exactly. The ionization constant for water, which we call the Kw equilibrium, mathematically proves that the concentration of hydronium multiplied by hydroxide is a constant. This equilibrium is always true, no matter the temperature. So even in perfectly neutral water, those ions are always lurking around.
All right, to wrap things up, we are entering the high-yield corner. Here is your rapid-fire, highly scannable, 10-second summary of the absolute must-know positive inorganic ions, the cations, for your exams. Calcium, totally vital for forming calcium pectate in plant cell walls and powering muscle contraction in animals. Magnesium, that's the essential core you need for chlorophyll production. And hydrogen ions, they're the absolute boss when it comes to respiration, active transport, and keeping your pH balanced.
And let's close out that 10-second summary with the critical negative ions, the anions. Phosphate is literally your biological energy currency, essential for ATP, plus building DNA and RNA. Chloride, absolutely non-negotiable for nerve impulses and sweating. And hydrogen carbonate acts as the crucial buffer, maintaining your blood pH. This right here is exactly how foundational chemistry scales, all the way up to run complex, full-body biological systems. So, we've seen how water provides the perfect reactive medium, and how carbon steps up as the ultimate structural backbone of life. I want to leave you guys with a pretty profound thought from Norman Horowitz, who actually headed up the Mars Mariner and Viking missions. He pointed out that the 1095-degree tetravalent geometry of carbon is so perfectly suited for complexity, it's highly unlikely any other element could ever replace it, even on an alien world. So next time you're analyzing data in the lab, ask yourself, could extraterrestrial life ever truly exist without a tetravalent carbon backbone? Think about that one. We'll catch you in the next explainer.